bother me and the lights bother me coming out of the dark, so if you can wait until I'm through to take pictures or shine lights, I would really appreciate it. This house is known as Wakefield, and the reason it's called Wakefield is because they used the very same plans to build this house that were used to build the original Wakefield in Virginia. And that was the house George Washington was born in. So this is an exact replica of George Washington's birthplace right here in Florence. It was built in 1826 by a man named James Sample. It was the first brick residence in the city. And the reason being is because James Sample owned the brickyard, and it was about where the lion cage is at UNA. Well, James Sample had his pick of any of the Florence belles he wanted to marry. He narrowed it down to 2 daughters of a prominent Alabama politician. The politician's name was Hugh McVeigh, and he would later become a governor of Alabama. The 2 daughters were Parthenia McVeigh and Susan McVeigh. They were rumored to be the most beautiful girls in Florence. And James decided he would marry Parthenia. And they must have been quite happy in this house. This was their bedroom on my right over here. They were married 6 years. And in those 6 years, Parthenia gave birth to 6 babies. She died in childbirth in that room in 1832, and they buried her out in the McVeigh family cemetery, which is now right in the middle of the Florence Industrial Park. Well, James Sample stood out at that funeral, and he looked around at all those 6 babies and thought, they need a new mama. And they need a new mama now. He came home from the funeral, and he immediately remarried Parthenia's sister, Susan. Parthenia wasn't even cold in her grave when James moved Susan into that very same bedroom. And the first night Susan spent here, she awakened. And there at the foot of her bed stood her sister in a long white nightgown with long black hair, and she was glaring at her. In fact, Susan became so convinced that Parthenia was angry at her and haunting her for marrying her husband that she refused to live here, and they sold this house and moved to a plantation in Mississippi. Now, guys, it's bad when you leave Alabama to move to Mississippi. I can hear somebody walking around in there. Do y'all see anything? Okay. In the way back? There's only one person living here, and I hear somebody behind here. Oh. This is a place we've had the door rattle here. W.H. Mitchell had this house for a while. And he was the minister at First Presbyterian Church in town during the Civil War. Florence changed hands around 44 times back and forth in those few years of war. That's quite a bit. And one of the times when the Federal Army were in charge, they passed an edict saying that there could be no public praying for the Confederacy. Well, W.H. Mitchell hopped up in the pulpit one Sunday morning, and he looked out over the congregation, which was interspersed with several men in blue Union uniforms, and he said a prayer for the success of Jefferson Davis and the success of the Confederate Army. They slapped him in handcuffs and sent him to federal prison for that prayer. The Yankees occupied this house during the Civil War and forced the Mitchell family to live down in the cellar while they occupied the upstairs rooms. And, you know, they didn't really leave any record of being bothered too much by Parthenia's ghost, but the Glenn family had a photography studio in here, and this is where I came to get my senior picture made. I pulled my car up out front, and as I was coming into the house, I took one look at it, and I thought, wow, this house has got to be haunted. The first thing I asked Mrs. Glenn was, you got a ghost in here? She said, well, of course we do. And she told me about Parthenia, and she told me that she had seen things out of the corner of her eye, heard footsteps in the hall at night and on the stairs, heard groans coming up out of the cellar. And I said, aren't you scared to live here? And she goes, oh no, I love Parthenia, and I love this house so much that when I pass away, I'm going to come back here and haunt it with her. Well, the Glens retired, and they sold it to the man who lives here now, and he's the only one here. There's somebody walking in the hall behind me. He's totally restored it to what it would have looked like during the federal style period of architecture when Parthenia lived here. All these ferns and the shrubs you see out here, the type of ground cover that they would have had back then. And he was an antique dealer, so you can imagine how immaculate the interior of this house is. Well, one day he came home while he was doing renovation and all the interior doors were closed. One day he came home and all the water faucets were turned on. His dog won't go in the room where Parthenia died. His burglar alarm goes off for no reason. This door opens for no reason. And it also rattles, and it has for the last 3 nights in a row. Oh, jeez. Don't get me, Parthenia. Did y'all hear that?
Yeah.
She's not right behind me, is she? Okay. Don't tell me that. Somebody took a picture one time and she was right behind me. I kid you not, it's on my website. You can look and see. He came home one night and were you the one who took the picture? Oh man, that was creepy. He came home one day and the silverware chest was open and all the silverware was laid out in a straight line across the floor. You know, there are forks, spoons, and knives in a silverware chest. I don't want to have anything to do with a ghost who can move knives. And he said one day the whole house filled with the scent of a woman's perfume. And he thought it was strange because no women had been in the house today. He went to a party that night. He came home and the whole house was still filled with this fragrance. And he knew he'd smelled it before. He couldn't quite place it. And then there's a cold draft right here. She's right beside me. Then he remembered where he'd smelled that fragrance before in the middle of the night. He awakened and he recalled that it was Mrs. Glenn's signature scent. And he thought, how neat that this house still smells like her after all the painting and renovation that I've done. I'm going to call her tomorrow and tell her. So he got up the next morning and he came out here and got his newspaper and he took it back inside and into the dining room, that same room where Parthenia died. He opened the paper and there was Mrs. Glenn's obituary. And she'd passed away the day before. And apparently she got her wish to come back and haunt this house with Parthenia. If you want to take photographs, we've been getting some really neat things here. So, and were you the one who took that picture last year or 2 years ago?
Yes.
You see the woman on the stairs, and there's a big orb off to the.
Yeah.
That is a great picture. There's a woman in a long dress with dark hair, and the owner of the house, I sent it to him and showed it to him, and he has seen a portrait of Parthenia, and he said that's her. So.
Pretty spooky.